I love the pillar. It's just perfect. I remember years ago we were in Assisi, Italy with Swamiji. They must have already had Il Rifugio, but maybe not. And somebody wanted to show us a piece of land that they thought might be nice to buy for the community there. And we were sitting on the porch of the land, and it was upwind from a pig farm. And the land itself was pretty nice, but there was this absolute stench coming upwind. And all of us were much more involved in the details, and we thought the place was unbearable. And I remember Swami just said, "Oh, there's always a drawback to everywhere," just like that. Fortunately, we didn't buy it. Oh, thank God. So I think a pillar is a very small price to pay. Everything has a drawback. I just want to talk to you a little bit because you are the founding members of the Pune City Centre, and you have a bright and glorious future, both as a Sangha together and as individual devotees. And as Jaya explained, he and I together and others have been through lots of stages that you all are going to get to go through. So I would both like to help you see the map a little bit, also to be enthusiastic about it, and just share a little bit of sort of how I see things in the hope that it's helpful. After I chat for a while, I'll give you a chance to ask questions, and even after we're serving dinner and so on, I'm just very happy to keep talking. Swami sent me out to talk, so that's what I do, and I'm really happy to do it everywhere. First of all, I really want to congratulate you on this beautiful place. Yeah, I mean, I understand that its biggest drawback is that it isn't big enough, which is like great. But it has a wonderful vibration, it's beautiful, it's well located, and I can feel just in the way you all pray together that it's bringing your spirit together. Having pulled a number of places up from nothing, Ananda Village was a smidgen when I got there. I was about 2 years after Jaya. Ananda Palo Alto, where I am now, had some foundation when I got there. We've pulled it up from there. Seattle and Portland didn't exist. We didn't actually personally locate there, but my husband and I, we went there for a number of years until there was enough groundwork for it to come up. So I appreciate what it takes to get something from nothing to something. And nothing to something is a very big step. Because once you have something, then it's easier for people to understand what you have, and you have a lot of great adventures in front of you. I much prefer to be at the beginning of things. I go out to the Pune land, and I will tomorrow, and it's been a year, and I know a lot has happened in a year. When I was there a year ago, I just loved it. It was undeveloped, it was dusty, the systems didn't work very well, the buildings were molding and falling apart, the things were unfinished, the roads are awful. It's like conditions are perfect, for devotees to build community and build character and build realization. And, once it's all just flowing, what's the fun in that? If the water system doesn't break in the middle of your biggest weekend, I mean, what are you going to do? Do you remember every year at Spiritual Renewal Week, when we had the most guests at Ananda Village, the water system ran, 360 days of the year perfectly, and for those 5 days, invariably, the water system would break. It just would hover there and just wait for that moment, and then the pipes would snap. In our early years at the seclusion retreat, we had this big water tower, and that's where all the water was. And it just periodically, all the water would just fall out of there. I have no idea why. I used to cook in the kitchen. When you first came to Ananda Village, you either went in the garden to grow the food or you went in the kitchen to cook it. I never learned to garden because I went right into the kitchen to cook it. And we had this building which was so crummy. It was so crummy. We actually used it for 20 more years, but it was so crummy when I was using it. And we used to have very cold winters at that time. The weather has changed, but we had very cold winters. And one day I was coming up to cook breakfast. You know, it's like 5:30 or 6 in the morning. It's snow everywhere, coming through several feet of snow. It's a dome like this. And there is this gorgeous pattern of icicles from the platform of the dome. So you have the white snow-covered dome, and then you have these beautiful icicles, like 3 feet down to the ground. And I just stood and admired it. I thought, how marvelous. I've never seen such a beautiful design. Of course, I went in and found out that the pipes had burst, the kitchen had flooded, all the water had gone out, and that was the beautiful pattern. So anyway, we went elsewhere in the snow. We're filling big buckets. We're hauling it back. But it was great. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. It was just so much fun to really feel that that you're doing something that's going to matter. I don't mean because it's difficult, but because you can feel the power of creativity and the power of the Om trying to take form and kind of missing every once in a while, but still just the magnetism of our shared hearts just literally pulling the energy from somewhere. I remember this Indian teacher, his name was Sant Keshav Das. He's been off the planet for some time. He came to visit Swami Kriyananda and Ananda at one point, and we were serving lunch, and he looked around at the whole place, and he turned to Swamiji and he said, "You must have done," he said, "someone did a lot of tapasya to make this place happen." Swami just kind of goes like this a bit. But yeah, because the energy of the universe is infinite. Om can form anything it wants to, but there has to be some magnetism that pulls that power to a focus. And it's the constant, repeated, determined effort of God's instruments and Guru's instruments who just keep generating the magnetism, and then the universe gradually responds and creates whatever image it is that we're holding in our hearts. Swamiji has taught us to manifest in a way that's slightly different than the way some of the prosperity gurus teach you to manifest. They tell you, and I don't know how big these things are in India, they're really big in America. They tell you to think exactly what you want, to make pictures of it and decide exactly what it's meant to be. There's a story told by one of those gurus about a man who died and went to heaven. And when he was being shown around heaven, he was shown the heavenly junkyard. And he said, the newcomer said, "Well, what's in the heavenly junkyard?" He said, "These are gifts that God would give to people on earth, but they weren't willing to accept them." And the man thought, "This doesn't make any sense to me." And he says, "For example, that beautiful Mercedes over there, I would have loved to have that car." And he said, "Well, it's interesting you should mention, because that was intended for you. But every time you thought of a car, all you pictured was a tiny little Volkswagen." So that's all you ever got. Now, the point behind that is this, is that it isn't so much the picture we have in our mind, and this is how Swamiji always teaches us, but the energy that we have in our hearts of devotion and willingness to serve. When I started in the role that we've had now for many years of living in an urban center, which is what we have and have had for a long time, and trying to, at that time what we had was relatively speaking small. Well, I think our first center was about the same size as this room, exactly. We also had an ashram house where a group lived together, and we had a small bookstore. So that was what it was when we moved there. And I had to think to myself, what am I really doing here? because we could think, oh, I'm here to get land, I'm here to make this, I'm here to make that. We moved from Ananda village where we had already much in place. But what I defined my role as, and I've held to it from that moment to this one, is we were there to create together experiences of the divine presence. And if we could create together experiences of the divine presence, and I don't just mean silently in Kriya Yoga, but also in the way we related to each other, in our friendships, in our support, in the fun we have together, in the opportunity to serve, and in the opportunity to share with others the blessings that we have received. If we could just keep consistently doing that, and keeping that thought always in our mind that this is the only reason that I'm here, then that begins to create the magnetism, and the Om then begins to form itself in whatever the best way is to keep that going. When you think about Master's incarnation, because all of us have to model ourselves on Master and how we understand him through Swamiji. In our Festival of Light, which many of you have heard, at least some, it speaks of the incarnation of the Masters. Greater can no love be than this, from a life of infinite joy and freedom in God, willingly to embrace limitation, pain, and death for the salvation of mankind. Such always has been the sacrifice of the great Masters for the world. Now, Master never talked about it as a great sacrifice. In fact, he says, he will come again and again, 1 trillion times if necessary, on bleeding feet over crags of suffering. That's a pretty, when you start hearing it, he's trying to communicate to us his commitment to our spiritual salvation. Now, sometimes the Masters come and they gather their few disciples and the whole group just hi-hos for the Himalayas, and that's what you get to do. I don't think anything is any easier than any other. If you're living in a Himalayan cave, whatever karma you have to face, you're still going to have to face it. If you're living in Pune City or Silicon Valley, whatever karma you have left to face, you're going to have to face it. It just takes the form that's needed. But our Master moved from Calcutta to Los Angeles, California. He started his life in India, gathered the power of his training with Sri Yukteswar, the power of the whole Indian culture behind him. He chose his incarnation in this way. And then he went off to America and settled in Los Angeles, which he called the Benares of the West. It's a little hard for those of us to really see that, but we take his word for it. Because any way you look at it, it's like, what an atmosphere in which to work. And he traveled all over the United States and got everybody really interested and excited in what he was doing, and he did miracle healings and just sort of stunned people literally with his extraordinary magnetism, which we can only imagine. Literally thousands of people came to see him. Only a tiny handful stayed with him, but he just generated all this magnetism. And I've been contemplating a lot lately the interesting balance that these free souls play, thinking of Swami Kriyananda in that way also, between this tremendous, this total spiritual freedom. Swamiji once asked Master, when Master was talking about previous incarnations, especially the incarnation as William the Conqueror, the book, 2 Souls, 4 Lives, which I see over there, is, if you haven't read it, it is fascinating. It takes your concept of what it is to be a self-realized master, and it takes it from here and it makes it to there. And it's extremely relevant. We're holding up Exhibit A. Here's Exhibit A. Like this. I am, as Jaya says, dedicated to Swami's books. But in any case, it was, Swamiji asked Master, he said, when you incarnate and take on a role like William the Conqueror was a king and a warrior, and that book gives you a wholly different perspective, but just on the surface of it, you can't help but think, what is a great avatar doing being William the Conqueror? You just don't know where to put it. But Swamiji asked him, when you incarnate like that, imagine being able to just say, excuse me, sir, as an avatar, and that's, Swami was able to do that. He said, what does it feel like? I mean, do you remember? Do you remember? And Master said, inwardly you are always free. That's how he put it. But there's this other side to it, which is for the Master's life to really have power for us, they have to actually enter into the conditions that we live with and then have to show us how to do them from a divine perspective. We know less about Lahiri Mahashaya's life than we do about Master, but his job was as a government accountant. Every time I have work that bores me silly, I imagine Lahiri Mahashaya working for 25 or 30 years as a government accountant. And I think, well, if he could find a way to do it in a divine way, there must be a way. They truly enter in and show us how to do this. And Master truly entered the material plane and manifested out of nothing the Self-Realization Fellowship, the buildings that he has, and much more importantly, the beautiful souls that were inspired by his constant efforts. But what he built externally is really not separate from the realization that he was able to inspire in his disciples, because it was all the way in which together they generated magnetism that pulled from the universe the power to transform and also the power to manifest. Now, Swami Kriyananda, both when he was William's son, Henry I, and in this incarnation when he was Swami Kriyananda, Yogananda's spiritual son, he was the next generation. Swamiji was 22 when Master was just 4 years away from the end of his life. So Swamiji came as a dynamic young man, had those very few years with Master, but enough for Master to plant in him the commitment to be his continuing force in the world. And Swamiji's entire life with Master was over before he was 25. It's really hard to think like that, or before he was 26, it was just over. The next 40 years of his, 60 years of his discipleship were all from the inner attunement that he was able to hold on to at all times. And Swami Kriyananda was then commissioned by Master to manifest it. He wasn't allowed to just go back into a cave somewhere and hold on to his own realization. His own realization depended on serving the Guru in the way that the Guru wanted to be served. And Swamiji had another adventure to go through, because at the age of 36, he was expelled from Self-Realization Fellowship from YSS out of India. And the facts of that are not the point here. The interesting fact is he had been a monk since he was 22. He had lived within the monastery. He'd been supported by the organization. He had done nothing but serve that work. Now he was 36. He was separated from everyone he knew because his entire world was within the definition of that work, and he was forbidden to participate. He was penniless because he had never worked for money. He'd never had a job. He was penniless, so he was alone and penniless, and all he had was his discipleship to Master. And that Master had asked him to work, had asked him to serve others, to teach, to lecture, to write. So Swamiji is in his parents' house at the age of 36, in their spare bedroom, trying to find what to do next. And all of us are sitting here because out of nothing but his discipleship and his determination to be an instrument of his master's ray in everything he did for the rest of his life. You know, and Swamiji's leadership, even in those years, was so interesting. He could have commanded obedience from us. He could have commanded us in any number of ways. He led by enthusiasm. He led by personal dedication. And above all, I think he led by joy. He was just so joyful in his relationship to God and Guru that you just wanted to be where he was, and then gradually you wanted to become what he had become. And so everything followed really first from his own attunement, but secondarily from the dynamic way in which he was willing to share that. And as I said, he never shared it by telling us we ought to be like this. He just was like this. And more than that, he demonstrated that reality through every aspect of life, because this is the unique quality of Master's mission at this time. It isn't a world renouncing off into a cave. It's not even primarily for renunciates, as serious spiritual life has been, you know, most of the history that we think of. It's the communities he wanted to found were householder communities specifically. And very interesting when you start thinking of most of his major disciples, Rajasi Janakananda, Oliver Black, Sister Gyanamata, they were all married. You know, actually Sri Yukteswar was married and Lahiri Mahashaya was married. You know, Babaji wasn't. Master wasn't. Master defied his horoscope and refused to marry. Even Swami Kriyananda was married for a time. It's like all of these stereotypes, narrow definitions that we have of the spiritual life, we are doing something else. And so part of the way that we have to serve our Guru is to really try to tune in to what this particular ray is. The goal of all of spiritual life is attunement. Swamiji tells us that when Master taught in public, he taught any number of subjects. If you aren't already signed up from ananda.org for something called On This Day in History, you can get this to appear in your email every day. Just go to ananda.org and look for it. You'll find it. It just comes. And they tell you for as many days, many years as they can, where Master was and what he was doing on this day in history. And it's fascinating to read. He's talking to the B'nai B'rith about the similarities between Judaism and Hinduism. He's talking to the Arizona Literary Society about heroes through the Vedic literature. You know, he's over here to the Chamber of Commerce talking about how to be a success in the world. Just everything you can imagine. There was nothing small about the way Master went forward. Now, what I was starting to say about attunement, Swamiji said that in public, Master talked about many different subjects. But when he was with those who were serious, especially those who were disciples, Swamiji said he only talked about attunement. It's very interesting to meditate on that. Even Kriya, which is, of course, the foundation of our spiritual practice, gains its power from the attunement it gives you with the grace of God. That's why we make it connected to becoming a disciple. Because if we just taught people Kriya and just had them go out and breathe and visualize in a certain way, there's no power in that. Because then it's just oneself and one's own little ego just manipulating the inner forces, and you might be able to get a certain power. But what we're really trying to do spiritually here is we're trying to become entirely new. We're trying to shift our entire vibration from all of these unfortunate commitments that we have made and that spin around us as the vrittis in the chakras to, as I put it, things that seem like a good idea at the time. You know, attachments, desires, fears, delusions, memories, hurts, aspirations, ambitions, you know, they all seem like a good idea at the time, and they're all spinning. And when we want to put our energy in one particular direction, a lot of it gets sucked around to maintain all of these other forces. And what the power of Kriya does for us is it pulls all of that energy that's not taking us where we really want to go, and it pulls it into the river of one-pointed consciousness. But the real power that causes that to happen is not so much our pushing from behind, you know, just kind of like trying to push, you know, try to push this little resentment into the river and push this little attachment into the river. The power of it is the master in front of us like this. There's a story in this collection that I published called Loved and Protected. Swamiji asked me, Swamiji decided this book should be written, which is a collection of stories of God's intervention. He started writing it and soon didn't want to. He handed it to me to write. I really didn't want to either. In fact, it was sort of a joke. I mean, I said, yes, sir, of course. Give me what you have and I'll work on it. To my husband in private, I said, I would never choose to write this book, never. I don't usually think in those terms. I just think in different ways. Swami knew exactly what he was doing. The process of writing that book for me was transforming. It was just, the book itself I think is very nice, but the experience of talking to so many people about God's participation in their life just lifted my understanding way beyond what it was before. But there's a story in there now. Let me try to think what I was saying. Let me think what the story was. Oh dear. Transformation. Oh yes. This woman was talking about trying to decide whether or not Ananda was her path. The way she tells the story is that she has a daughter, and the daughter became a disciple of Master, and she was concerned that her interest in this path was really an interest in her own daughter. And she wanted to be sincere spiritually. So she prayed to Master. She sort of felt that she needed a resolution, and on New Year's Eve one night she just prayed and really wanted Master to answer. And he materialized in front of her. And she's a mother, and being a mother is a definition of herself very deeply. And she said, he had his arms outstretched. She said, the way I was when my children were small. You know how a mother would do that? Come here, darling, just like that. And the baby runs right up and jumps in her arms. I think Master communicated to her in a way that she could immediately understand. He just stood in front of her with his arms out like that and just welcomed her. Now, when we have that experience, the story's so sweet because she then told her daughter what had happened. And her daughter said, oh, Mama, do you have any idea how special that is? And she said, he doesn't welcome everyone like that? She didn't know. But you know, when he comes, that's how you feel. But however we have that experience, whether we feel him in our heart, whether we see him, whether he comes to us through Swamiji. Master came to me through Swamiji. It was when I saw Swamiji. I didn't really know Master or connect with him much, but I went right through Swamiji to what was coming through him, and he was always my window. And if he told me that it was Master coming through him, I said, fine, sir, whatever you say. It doesn't make any difference. But however it comes to us, whether it's a materialized form in front of us, whether it's the sound of music, whether it's a meditation, whatever it is, there comes a moment when it's not a question of pushing ourselves toward it. Nothing can hold us back. That our energy just flows in that direction. And that's how transformation takes place. That we simply, we just forget. We forget about anything except this is everything that I want to be. And our Kriya, and our service, and our prayers, and our chanting, make a long list. Master actually said, we have to do 1/100th part of what he taught, and that will be enough to bring us to God. I changed that in my mind for the last 35 years to 1/10 of what he taught, which seemed pretty remarkable in itself. And I recently read it's actually 1/100th. Because it's really his power. But again, understand, it's the power of joyful enthusiasm. And coming back to where we are, here in a new center that's just beginning to try to build itself. I was remembering when we first lived at Ananda Village. First of all, there were so few of us. We lived very isolated. The isolation of the Pune land is very similar to the isolation of the land that we had, except there was no such thing as internet or cell phone. Although that stuff doesn't work so well out there, but at least there's some of it. It didn't exist for us. We didn't even have electricity. So we were really just completely to ourselves all the time. And because of that, we always knew where everybody was. That was the good news and that was the bad news. You always knew where everyone was. But we also understood that nothing existed unless we gave energy to it. There was no them who were just making it happen. And for example, we had every Sunday morning, we had a Sunday service, we called it a Sunday Satsang. And it was up the road for a long time at the seclusion retreat. It was 6 miles up this road and only a few of us had cars. We'd all just sort of walk out to the road and various trucks would pick us up, people driving, and we'd just get in and get a ride up there. But it never crossed our minds not to attend. It's sort of like we were all doing this together. And unless we all committed our enthusiasm to it, there was no there. And even without thinking, it was like Master had given his life for this mission. Swamiji was clearly giving his life for this mission. If we wanted to walk in their footsteps, that was a necessary part of it. And there was very little, really. We weren't self-conscious about what we were trying to do. We didn't have this idea, we are the next generation of a great master and we are doing a great work. Swami never let us go there. In fact, once I actually asked him, Swamiji, what is the mission of Ananda? And he said, to have fun, like that. It was a famous answer, to have fun. The whole room appropriately burst out laughing. It seemed like such a preposterous answer. And then he said, after we stopped laughing, he said, but you have to understand what I mean by fun. And he said, fun is experiencing Divine Mother and then sharing that joy with everyone. So it wasn't frivolous, but it was really from the heart. And then we had to take every opportunity. You have to work hard, and as they say, you also have to work smart. We had the advantage of Swamiji's direct guidance. You have the advantage of the experience of 45 years. We had no idea what it was supposed to look like. None. We were like sculpting a piece of stone, and we didn't even know what the animal was supposed to be. We just kind of randomly pick up chisels and hack at it for a while and hope we weren't doing more harm than good. Sometimes we did more harm than good, but fortunately it all worked out in the end. But you at least know what it looks like. You can see pictures, you can hear stories, you can feel it. But make no mistake, it still just comes out of the joy of doing it. And Swamiji often said to me, you know, it's about your magnetism. I was a very hard worker, and I often overworked. And when I would overwork, I would lose my joy. And it wasn't really that I couldn't work that hard, but he always wanted me to understand, you have to do it joyfully. In fact, when someone once asked him, how much discipline is enough discipline? He says, that which you can do with joy. He said, when it ceases to be joyful, then your magnetism begins to shift, and you won't be drawing the divine power, which is really going to give you the fruit of your own effort. And the other part of all of this, and we were fortunate because we were moving behind Swamiji. And so you all have slightly different karma in this. Everybody has different karma. When David and I, my husband, when we moved from Ananda Village, which was in 1986, there was already a small house about this size in Sacramento where Haridas and Vijay, who Vijay is in Noida now, Nayaswami Vijay and Haridas, the two of them lived in that house. And they had a very small group going on there. There was also a bigger house in San Francisco where I think Dhyana had lived there, Jyotish and Devi also lived there. But everybody's idea of Ananda, it's just so childish when I think of it now. Swamiji knew where we were going and what we were doing. But the rest of us thought that we had Ananda Village. It was a great place to live. We loved it there. We were nicely insulated from all the trials and travails of the world. We had each other. And the word Ananda meant that physical geographic place, even though we had these little outposts. And if you got sent to an outpost, you lasted about 18 months. And your thought always was that you had been exiled from home, and pretty soon you would get to go back, right? And you would do about 12 months of good work, 6 months of being miserable away from home, and then you would get to go home again. But when David and I were asked to move, and also Ananta McSweeney, who lives at Ananda Village also, he and his wife Maria went to Sacramento about the same time. We had this thought that if Master's mission is really for the whole world, if this really is the avatar for the new age, if this is really a new expression, if this is really East and West coming together, all the remarkable things that Swamiji has said and written and Master himself declared, it's got to be bigger than 900 acres in one spot. It also has to have more options for more people, because not everybody fits into a box this big. It's just not possible. I mean, look at us. And now we're this huge international enterprise. So we just committed ourselves to, I just would say, blooming where Swamiji had planted us. And he had assigned us that job, so it wasn't obscure to figure out. But we also felt that everywhere on this planet there are souls waiting to be awakened. And our job was just to find them. I've traveled with Swami Kriyananda a great deal and been with him in many settings. And one of my dearest memories, and let me phrase it this way, Swamiji always, no matter where he was always looking for those souls that Master had sent him so he could offer them some of this spark. And he would give that spark to anyone who would take it in any form. The taxi driver, the waitress in the store, just the random person he would meet. And my dearest memory of him in this respect was at the Om bookstore at the Metro Mall in Gurgaon, where we have the wishing tree. And he was there, and I think he wasn't wearing his Swami robes. I think he was just dressed in a Western jacket. And we were in the little section where the spiritual books are. And some total stranger pulls Autobiography of a Yogi off the shelf, and he's holding it in his hand, and Swami turns, and Swami could have been 6 years old. I mean, this was just a few years ago. I was his disciple. Swami said, I lived with him for 3.5 years. He was the most wonderful person I ever knew. I mean, the man did not respond. He sort of backed away a little bit. I don't know if he kept the autobiography or not. But it was such a lesson to me. It was like, why not? You know, somebody has come close and touched it, and Swami leads by enthusiasm. He was just showing this man how very, very happy Autobiography of a Yogi might make you by being that sort of person. And by then, therefore, not shirking, and this is the rest of it, not shirking the responsibility, the sacrifice, the hard work that's required in order to put ourselves in tune with the ray of the Master. Master sacrificed himself to come and make this work. He meant it. It wasn't like casual. In my beginning of my spiritual life, I just somehow thought that all the externals, the community we were building, the work we were sharing, I somehow thought it was not relevant to my desire for self-realization. I'm embarrassed to say it. And then one day I noticed that Swami seemed to think it was all really important. And I did what I always did, which is, let's see, who has a better chance of being right, Swami or Asha? You know, who is more ruled by confusion? Who is more likely to be in tune? And I realized if this great soul is devoting every ounce of his energy, every penny that he can generate, every minute of his time to doing his guru's work, and this is what it looks like, it behooves me to get in line. I was asked recently, we have, you know, this movie, Finding Happiness, which is going to premiere in India really soon. Because I did a radio interview over the internet just a couple of days ago, 6:30 at night in America, 6:30 in the morning here, so I was able to be on the air. And the woman had watched the movie, and for those of you who haven't seen it or have seen it, Jyotish and Devi talk about the fire that burned the community down. And now it was 1976. Many of you weren't even born, but it was a big thing for us when it happened. But this interviewer says to me, well, you know, it must have been really hard, all that you did there. She mentions the fire. That must have been really hard. Just spontaneously, I said, oh, the fire was really fun. And I realized that sounds a little strange, doesn't it? But it was really fun. Wow, when Lord Shiva takes such an interest in your life, you know, it's exhilarating. It was really exhilarating to just see what God can do when he makes up his mind. You know, you are just nothing compared to that. It was fun to just see how quickly everything can go away and all the power that was there. It was marvelous. So then I tried to think, what was hard? And the only thing that I could think of that was hard is, if you want to say it, but even that I use the word judiciously, is the extraordinary example that Swami Kriyananda set for us of loving kindness, of one-pointed dedication to his guru, of willingness to have extraordinary faith in the work that he was doing and in Master's power to sustain him, and always trying to reach up for that. And that just the opportunity always to, wherever we are, oh my goodness, we could be better. But what goes with that is also from a radio interview. Swamiji was being interviewed in Los Angeles a number of years ago, not that many. But the interviewer said to him, are you a happy man? The people ask you the oddest questions. Are you a happy man? I mean, this man is just oozing bliss. Are you a happy man? He said everybody will say they're happy. Few people will admit that they're miserable. But he said the mark of a truly happy man is that he wants everybody in the world to be as happy as he is. And Swamiji himself said, I just saw it on a video recently, he said, I believe that every single person in the world can be awoken to spirituality and can realize God. He said, I know that's not really true, but I like to think it's true. And he says, it inspires me to keep trying to give, because it's the nature of a happy person to want to do that. And here's another factor, and Swamiji has a genius, I say has a genius for taking very sophisticated spiritual ideas and bringing them down to something that the average person can say yes to. So then you can build on your own experience to something that's beyond your experience. So everybody always asks, why did God make creation? And the answer that's often given is so that he could share his bliss with many. Of course, the answer to that is not a lot of people seem to be getting it. You know, he's not really enjoying himself through many. That's the phrase. Not a lot of people are enjoying themselves. But then Swami put it like this. He said, and he talked about Satchidananda, ever new joy, being the best way to describe what we call the infinite. And he said, just think of in your own life, if you discover something that's beneficial, like the coffee in that shop is so good, or we went to this hotel in Mumbai that had the best almond croissants. You know, we're going to tell everybody who ever goes to Mumbai to go and get one of those almond croissants, because you're happier when you share it, aren't you? Whatever little pleasure you had in it, it gets bigger when you pass it on. He says, as above, so below. It's the nature of happiness to want to multiply itself. Now, for all of us sitting in this small room thinking that maybe we need a bigger one, when David and I moved to Palo Alto, we had a room this size, and actually the first program we gave in there, it was wall to wall, and we did not want to go into real estate right away, but the first thing we had to do was to find another place, because we couldn't expand what we were doing where we were standing. We wanted to buy a building, but we didn't have any supporters or any money. So we rented another place, and we were very careful to make sure that we could get out of the lease in a few months. We were there for 7 years. But we got a bigger place, and we were stuck there. We still wanted to buy. We couldn't figure out how to buy, but we were stuck. And so my husband, who has a very good intuition for these things, remodeled it. We remodeled it and expanded it, and almost as soon as we did that, the next step was open to it. It was like we had to just keep generating the magnetism. And then finally, we moved into the temple that we're in now, which you may have seen pictures. It actually appears in the Finding Happiness movie. It was a Catholic church. It's a really, I can't step in that building. Every time I step in that building, it was a total gift from Master, just a total gift. It was sold to us at a ridiculously low price with ridiculous ease. You should know we had no money. When we went to see, no, that's not true. We didn't have nearly enough money. And just to tell you the story, we met with the realtor. We had to appear to be really solid people. So we had about 3 or 4 people in our congregation who actually, had real solid jobs and looked really good and could say things like, I own this, or, I work for this company. We had 3 or 4 of them, so we got them all together. And we made them our purchasing committee so that they could meet with the owners and one of our realtors, Santoshi, actually, some of you know her. She carried a briefcase. We planned. She carried a briefcase. There was nothing in it but a picture of Master. But she carried it and looked really official like this. And we fooled them. And they were willing to sell it to us, and we gave them the impression that we could afford it, which we couldn't, actually. At that time, we really didn't have it. But we had been saving. And I have to be really realistic about this. For the 7 years that it took us to find that building, we were putting money away on a really steady basis. And we were constantly talking to everyone. We need to create something that looks like what this teaching really is. You know, Swamiji, in the early years of Ananda, we were so primitive, and many of us loved it that way. We just had these old yogi samskars. I lived in a little trailer. I'm just sort of looking for a space, probably about the size of this rug here. It was small enough. When I went like that, I could kind of brush the edges of the walls. And when I energized, I had to go like that. For years, even when I was outside, I would energize like that. And it had a little place to eat, a little place to bathe, which was just a bucket, a little place to bathe, a little place to sleep, a little place to meditate. What more did you need? And I had nothing in there. My most valuable possession was my harmonium and my mala. That was it. And I looked forward to having less. I was really eager to have less. And then, I'll just begin with it. Swamiji comes to India 1976, after 77, after he wrote The Path. He spent 6 months in India. He went up to Kashmir. You may have heard of Suffering Moses, who does all that beautiful work. This was when Kashmir was possible and safer. Suffering Moses was still alive and had been a good friend of Swamiji's. There was no email at that point, so everything went by letters. I started getting letters from Swamiji that there is all this beautiful carved Kashmiri furniture that Mr. Moses assures him this is a dying art, that this furniture is not going to be available later. So Swami is buying several $1,000s worth of this furniture, which was, pennies for what it was really worth. He's going to ship it all to America. We do not have a building. There is no place to put this furniture, but Swamiji is there and he's going to buy it. Now, if you go to America to the Crystal Hermitage, it's all over Crystal Hermitage, and it was a brilliant purchase. But for some of us, who own a mala, Swamiji's buying a carved dining room table for 12. I mean, we didn't have kitchens, and he's buying this. But he said something amazing at the time that I've never forgotten. He said, we have to bring this work up to a certain standard, because if we're not refined to a certain point, people won't understand that our ideas are also that refined. That it's not that we have to create luxury or anything like that, but this is a new teaching. This is not just Hinduism as usual or Christianity as usual. This is a new expression, and it has this elegant simplicity to it. And we have a responsibility to help people to understand what we're doing. We have to help them, above all, by our consciousness, by our friendship, by our sense of joy, by our fun, by our relationships with each other. But also we have to create places of pilgrimage that are based upon this work. And if we just do our part, and our part is everything that I've been saying, I am amazed how much has come up around us in Palo Alto. And I don't ever remember doing it, really. I just remember that every day we just get up and do the best we could to be happy people sharing our happiness and to be instruments of Master's presence. I follow that teaching. It's been making me really happy for a really long time. We don't have to be sophisticated in it. We just have to be sincere. Years ago, Haridas, when he was like 19 or 20, early on in Ananda, Swamiji was doing a program, I believe in Los Angeles, and he took a crowd of us down there to help. And Haridas went to a television station to see if they would interview Swami Kriyananda. Well, the people he talked to said, we don't know this Swami Kriyananda guy, but we like you. Why don't you go on the television? Haridas had been on the path for a couple of years and was not, at that point, a very experienced spokesperson. he called Swami hoping that Swami would say, that's crazy, you can't do that. But Swami said, I think that's a great idea. So Haridas finds himself in front of the television camera, and he's wearing, his astrological bangle around his wrist. And so the interviewer points to it and says, could you explain what the purpose of that is? And Haridas could not, Whether in other circumstances he could have, I don't know, but in the moment he could not. But he said with his whole heart, he said, well, I can't really explain, I'm not sure I understand, but every time I look at it, it reminds me of the commitments I have made in my life. Perfect. It had so much integrity, so much magnetism. Each one of us is just standing here, and together we just create this force field. People, if everybody gives whatever it is that they can give, whether that's a handful of rupees or, a bank account full of rupees, or an hour of your time, or all of your time. Master understands. It's not like he wants us to be something that we're not, but he wants us to be everything that we are. And a tremendous amount of it is just our wholehearted saying yes. That's where the attunement comes from. Master talked about many things in public, but in private he talked about attunement. And what is attunement? It's to be in the vibration of this ray, the vibration of Master, the vibration of Swamiji. And of course, that means that we move through this world with the same attitudes and actions that they moved. Greater can no love be than this, to give ourselves for the salvation of mankind. It's amazingly gratifying to participate in the spread of this work. To see someone who a year or two later, or 3 or 5 years later, everything about their life is different because they came on this path, and whatever tiny part you played in it, which was just to say, hello, are you new here? I'm so glad that you're here. It's just, there's no feeling on earth like it. Every year on January 5th in our community, we celebrate Master's birthday in this particular way, which is, we decided that the greatest gift we can give Master, birthdays are a time of giving presents, is our hearts. And through the course of Ananda life, at different times, we make different commitments. We take a vow. We start actually just with a vow to seek truth. Then there's a vow of a disciple. And then we have various, the Sevaka and the Sadhaka orders, not the Nayaswami order, but various ways within Ananda that you say, this is my life. And every year, everybody retakes whatever vow they've taken. And so group by group, they'll come and we'll lead them through and they'll repeat it again. Every individual then puts a flower on the altar, pronams before Master, and we all chant to celebrate each one's commitment. Without exception, that's the most moving experience that I have every single year. I just stand back and you just watch, and it has nothing to do with you. It's just like each one is in personal relationship to the Masters. And you just see how together, we're all building this force. My friend Durga had a dream, which I know was a superconscious dream. And she said she was standing in a really large circle of Ananda brothers and sisters. And she said, and we were all holding hands in this circle. And every so often, this light would come down and it would be someone's turn to ascend, is how she described it. And that light would come and then someone would spiral upward and they would disappear from the circle because they would merge into the light. Now that in itself was beautiful. But what she also described was whoever was uplifted, everybody felt equally joyful. She said there was no sense of, oh, I wish it was me, and sort of trying to make yourself bigger so the light would notice. It was like, if it happened to anyone, it happened to everyone. Master writes, Swamiji writes, in his autobiography, The New Path. Toward the end, I think it's the chapter right after Master dies. And he actually has sentences in there. This is why I love Swami's books. I mean, I love them for many reasons, but he'll just have a sentence in there that completely revolutionizes your way of thinking. He talks about spiritual family and how the masters become powerful and gradually draw many, many souls to them, and then how those souls keep reincarnating together. And then he says, because I'm paraphrasing, we work out our salvation, he says, not only inwardly with God, but also outwardly, as we gradually refine our relationships with one another. That's really quite a statement. I mean, that's really telling us that it isn't just enough to say, I'm here for God. It's that we also have this responsibility. And we often talk about it as our yet unmet brothers and sisters. And sometimes, at different times in our community, we've actually collectively said an affirmation. You know, we have room in our hearts for all of you. You know, we're here for you, come. And then they do. And there's just sort of this feeling that there's like this hole in the family that's exactly the same size and shape as this new soul that's come. And over time, you sort of look around and, look, here you are. There was nothing. And now there's this beautiful house, and all of you sitting in it, and all of us loving Master together, and everything good that's happened, it's just going to be more and better. And what a privilege, isn't it so? Well, that's my part of it. Do you have any questions or thoughts? Anything that I could answer or that I could comment on?
Tell us the most moving incident of your life.
The most moving incident? I don't know if I could measure, because of course what comes to me is moments with Swamiji. Certainly one that I think of right now is the last time I saw him, sitting in the chair in his house in Pune. And he had told me to write 5 books. And he said, now what were they? And he went like that on his fingers, you know, and just to make sure that I remembered. And, you know, he just smiled at me so beautifully. And of course now I realize I never saw him. I did see him drive by in his car after that, but that was the last, like, really close. And it just reminds me that he's really looking out for us. You know, he really knew. And he just wanted to make sure that we knew where we were going. I'm sure I could count backwards from that and give you 100 more, but every one of them involves him. So I would say then the first most moving thing is the first time I saw him. The second might be the last time I saw him. So there you have it. Anyone else?
Asha?
Yes.
When you took the expression that was Ananda Village, created the expression that was Ananda Palo Alto, and what guidance could you give to those of us who are trying to create Ananda Pune?
When my husband David and I were asked to move to Ananda Palo Alto, we were in the unusual position of actually having previously trained a little bit for the position, because for the last 5 years we'd been traveling and teaching and sort of trying to generate that kind of energy. It was unique in Ananda history, you should know this, to actually be trained for the job before you were given it. So there was a kind of a exhilaration about that. And my husband and I work as a team, although he's not as public a figure as I am. My joke is that he does the work and I tell everybody about it. And it works really well that way. So before we left Ananda Village to move to Palo Alto, David actually sat in front of Swamiji and said, what do you see? Tell me how we should proceed here. And in what we consider to be quintessential Kriyananda, he said, I don't know. He said, you're going to be on the scene there. You're the one who's going to be close to it. He said, start, and then you tell me. And that's really most of the direction that we got. In 25 years, he gave us 2 specific instructions, and both of them were, I don't really think that's a good idea. But once we thought someone was going to give us land to make a retreat at the time that the Expanding Light, which is the retreat at Ananda Village, was really struggling to survive. And most of the people came from our area, and so we wanted to start a retreat in our area, which Swamiji pointed out to us would absolutely just, decimate the Expanding Light. So he said, I think we need that like we need a hole in the head, is what he actually said. And then I said to David, I'm picking up that he doesn't favor this idea. Are you feeling the same thing? And so we didn't do that. And once we were going to dissolve our ashram house before we had a place to move people. And he said, that's not fair. Don't do that. But after that, it was all just feeling his energy. And also just sort of remembering how he did things. Just how kind he was, how enthusiastic he was, how, oddly enough, Swami was very bold, but he was also very cautious. He was never foolish. He never just wildly affirmed that something would work. He always had energy and consciousness behind it. And all of those things, but the actual and only word is attunement. When we actually had our community, which is an apartment complex that we do not own, we simply lease it. And we were dedicating that, and I was standing on the platform and he was sitting behind me. And I started talking about how we had gotten to that point. And I had the absolute experience that he had done it all. And that all we had done was just kind of be on the scene. And that it was always his understanding that was moving us. And that didn't really happen from calling him on the phone and asking him questions or having some kind of a guidebook. It was just using common sense and actually following exactly what I just told you. We were always conscious that we were here to love people. We were here to love each other the way Swami had loved us. And we were here to carry out Master's unique vision. And somehow, after that, we just sort of knew what to do. It's sort of hard to say it more than that, because it grows like a seed out of your own heart. And if you keep your heart together, and your hearts together, then everything will begin to follow after that. Best I can offer. But that is the answer. Any other questions or thoughts?
We talk about karma and Swamiji's book and Yogananda's books. How do we know what is our karma?
Well, Swami, when he was, actually the question was, he was asked, if it's happening to you, that's one of the ways you can tell what your karma is. If it wasn't, it wouldn't. And I think we unnecessarily confuse ourselves with that question by imagining that there's some abstract answer. I mean, our karma is whatever's next in front of us. Our karma is to overcome all karma and to realize God. And here's another answer that's related to that. This was a particular circumstance, but it's close to this. This woman in America, I have to sort of say this, but you all know this, people choose their own marriage partners, and they often make a few mistakes. It's a bit of a chaotic scene. to put it mildly. And this woman came to Swamiji, and she was enamored of this man, and they didn't get along at all. It was an absolute awful combination. They just fought with each other. It was just a mess. But she also had this vague idea in her mind that there was this cosmic destined one, destined for her, and she was afraid that if she used her common sense and separated from this awful relationship, that he still might be the one, like this. So she asked this question of Swamiji like this, and he was kind to her and encouraged her to notice that they didn't get along at all, and maybe that was a hint. But after she left, he said to me about her, he said, she has so many lessons to learn that she could learn them with any number of people. You have to be a lot more refined before your karma comes to such a fine point that only this or only that will do. Now bear in mind, if you are at such a fine point, you also have a very different relationship to your own self. So most of us, and I'm not singling you out because you just asked this question, I'll just say most of us have a lot of lessons to learn, and the exact details of how we learn them, God doesn't really care about it as much as we do. We think that every little point makes a difference. And Swami has made it very clear, the only thing God cares about is how much we love him. And whether we love him as a householder in this particular city or as a monk in that particular city, if we concentrate on loving God, serving God, thinking about the welfare of others, meditating, doing our kriyas, then everything else will just take care of itself. And all of the preoccupation, what about me, what about me, what about me, blocks any intuition. And so the more we worry about ourselves, the less we're able to know what God wants us to do, because we're so busy worrying about ourselves that there's no attunement. And if we just figure, I'll just make the best of this. I know in my own life I was, trying to make a certain decision, and I asked Swamiji, is this a good thing or a bad thing? He said, it's absolutely neutral. It didn't look neutral to me, it looked like huge. He said, it's neutral. It's what you make of it, whether it is. So wherever you're standing, make the absolute best of it spiritually, and that'll just take you to the next step. If we stand on the edge and don't step in, waiting to know whether we should or we shouldn't, we never change our consciousness, and therefore we never know, because we're stuck right at that point. Do you see what I mean? So act as if you're perfectly confident, and this is exactly what God wants, and do it with your whole heart with absolute joy, and everything will roll out after that. I actually make very few decisions, and even though I've taught classes on intuition, I don't really like to, because too often people become too self-preoccupied in the name of being intuitive, whereas we would be better just to be joyful and serviceful and let that magnetism guide us to the next step. Okay? Prisha.
I've been wondering recently, I know that when you all were starting out, Swamiji is the one that taught you, but did you all get together and try to figure out, what did he really mean, or how do we...
In the Bible, at the end of Jesus' life, when he was actually trying to purge the weak ones out of the flock, because he knew he was going to be crucified and it was going to be pretty tough, and he wanted the group to be strong. Swamiji said at the end of Master's life, he also pushed a lot of people away because he knew they wouldn't be able to hold, and he wanted the group to be strong. It's an odd thing. Their karma was with him, and then they were ready to go on. The point of all of this is, Jesus said, eat my body and drink my blood. And then in the Bible that I have, it says, the disciples said one to another, this is a hard teaching. And I can just picture it. They walked out of the satsang and they said, "Did you hear what he said? What the heck was he talking about?" And then it actually says, "And from this point, many walked with him no more." So yes, of course, we all get together and say, what do you think Swami meant? How are we supposed to do this? We help each other all the way through. But you naturally don't want to do that from the point of view of what a nutty suggestion. You want to be talking to people who are sincerely trying to understand. There's two ways to question. One is, what does he mean by that? And the other one is, what does he mean by that? Same question, but one will draw to you an expanded understanding and the other will block all understanding. You don't really want to talk to people who are trying not to have an answer. You want to talk to people who are trying to have an answer. You need to be very selective in who you listen to and how you listen to them. I'll tell you one thing that happened once. Swamiji, he had a lot of trouble with his hearing, and he was always buying, in the last 15 or 20 years, new hearing aids, new devices. He was an early adapter. He would always look at the latest thing. And so one thing he had was this separate microphone that he would put in the middle of like the table, and it would pick everything up, and then it would radio it to his hearing aids. Well, we were a group of us, people who had responsibility in Ananda. Jyotish and Devi were there and a few others, about 8 or 10 of us. And we were sitting around a table, and Swamiji, I don't remember the subject, but whatever it was, this was a hard teaching. We were not enthusiastic about what he was trying to get us to do. And he excused himself from the table. He was stronger then, so he could walk away by himself. So he excused himself from the table to go into the restroom. As soon as he was gone, we started like, oh my God, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? Of course, the radio was right in the middle of the table. And just before Swami came back, oh my God, and he just came back like this, We were caught, absolutely caught. Strangely, I have blotted out everything else that happened at that day. But yes, of course. I mean, one has to think. And it doesn't do you any good just to say, oh, that's what he wanted. You have to understand it, or else you don't have any magnetism. There's a certain magnetism to this is what Swami wants, and therefore I'll do it. But you can see how much magnetism there is in that. You have to be able to really, and I started working with Swami later than I should have, but over the years, there was a certain point, because as he explained it to me, he wasn't like every word that came out of his mouth wasn't this infallible statement of what we had to do. He entered into the human experience. And as he put it to me, sometimes he was just trying to be creative and get the creative energy going. And he talked about how frustrating it was for him when people just mindlessly took what he said and then tried to run around and make it happen. He describes the time with Master. People, quote, running around like chickens with their heads cut off, feverishly trying to do Master's will, instead of really trying to understand and be in tune. So Swamiji said, when he has ideas, he's trying to get us engaged. And sometimes his ideas, most of the time his ideas were fabulous, but sometimes they were directional. So I would try to think to myself, not what did he say, but what was he trying to accomplish? What was he trying to manifest? What was the energy he was trying to bring out? And when I could think like that, then I sometimes could think, well, given the circumstances and the facts that I know that he might not know, or this new situation, this is how to get where we're going. You see, you don't visualize the model of the car that you want. You visualize the energy of what you want. We want a place where the devotees can come. We want Master's vibration in this city. We want to be able to be together more. Maybe we want to be able to work and live together. We want to strengthen our meditations. That's the energy of what you want, and then the form will come out of that. And so you can't impose it from the outside, but you get it from the inside. That's why I said it was attunement. It was what would be trying to happen here. And that way you can make it work. Okay. Anything else? All right. Then, what happens next? Food? Thank you all very much. It's a real joy to be with you.
The next thing is that we show our appreciation for Asha and being here tonight.
Okay.
Thank you, Asha.
Thank you.